Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. Daniel 6, we will get into, obviously, the story of Daniel and the lion's den, but we're going to make a number of points before we get there. As you turn to Daniel chapter 6, last week we were in Daniel chapter 5, and I talked to some folks after the service last week. I talked to some folks before the service tonight, and there's a number of different takes on Belshazzar. And, some people talked last week after the service, say Belshazzar was probably Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. There were some, even tonight before the service, that said, well, Belshazzar was probably a younger brother. He was a direct son of Nebuchadnezzar, but he had a couple sons, and the older one was king, and now Belshazzar was taking over. And so we don't know all that. We just don't know the exact details. We don't have all the details of Babylonian history. Nebuchadnezzar is well written about in world history, and there's much to know about Nebuchadnezzar from the Word of God and from history itself. After that, not so much. We know that there's only 2 kings, and then the Medes and the Persians take over. And so Daniel is alive for all of this period of time. Daniel is able to see all of this through. He comes under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Early in Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Daniel is taken captive. He becomes a key, integral part of Nebuchadnezzar's administration. And we see that. He becomes a very influential part. He evidently, and I'm saying this because we'll see the transition here from chapter 5 to chapter 6, but evidently he loses some of his influence after Nebuchadnezzar. So somewhere between the one who follows Nebuchadnezzar, again, whether that's an older son or one of his sons and Belshazzar's a grandson, either way, between these 2 kings, they don't know him. They don't respect him. They don't search for his wisdom the way Nebuchadnezzar learned to do. And as we're going to see, the way future kings will do. But in this period of time, Daniel seems to be shuffled off to some obscure place, to the point that as he comes in to read the handwriting on the wall, like we saw last week, Belshazzar says, "Art thou the Daniel that we've heard of? Are you the one?" Because he doesn't seem to know him. It says a lot negative about Belshazzar's character, his wisdom, his discernment. He didn't even know who this guy was. And he was the one guy who was able to answer the most important question Belshazzar had that night. Either way, whoever was sitting on this throne of the Chaldeans on this night, whether it was just Belshazzar or Belshazzar and an older king, they are both removed, to say the least. They are removed from power at the end of chapter number 5. The Medes and the Persians have made their way under the wall, diverted the great river around the city. Unbeknownst to Babylon and what's going on, they have taken the time to divert the river, to go under the wall where the river passed through the wall. They've made their way into the city, and while they are partying, chapter number 5, while they're partying, while God is writing on the wall, the Medes and Persians have already infiltrated the city. The city will fall that night into the hands of the Medes and Persians. That is a major historical step. Reading through the pages of world history, the transition from the great Babylonian Chaldean Empire to the Medes and the Persian Empire was a major transition. And it's happening here in chapter 5, while Daniel is reading to them the handwriting on the wall, and the Medes and Persians have come in. Now, we've talked about this last Sunday night. I mentioned it again this morning. Daniel, at the gratitude of Belshazzar, the king, is made third in command. Again, a very short-lived promotion, and we saw that. However, I say short-lived, it was short-lived under Belshazzar, and it was a short-lived promotion under the Chaldeans. But as Darius and the Medes and Persians begin the reign here, we find in chapter 6, Daniel is back into a position of importance and a position of prominence. That's going to be two thoughts on that. One, I think it says an awful lot about Daniel's character, that even though the empire has completely changed overnight, right, from chapter 5 to the Medes and the Persians taking over, and we see that unfold in chapter 6. And we don't know how long the transition is between chapter 5 and chapter 6, but we do know the Medes and Persians took over by the end of chapter 5. And here we find Daniel now in a position of prominence, leadership, and authority once again. That's uncanny, right? That's unusual. He wasn't removed and deposed of like the other Chaldean rulers. He must have been talked to, interviewed, or known ahead of time. And the Medes and Persians are like, we want you helping us the way you help them. We want you to remain. We want you to stay here. So that's an unusual thing. However, I think what we're going to find in chapter 6 is that that doesn't go unnoticed by other people who were expecting a promotion, right? In other words, there's going to be a lot of men in chapter number 6 that are not too happy about the fact that Daniel has a position of authority. And I'm sure there were those that are coming into Babylon. Great Babylon has fallen. It is in our hands now, the Medes and Persians. They have ascended to a position of leadership. And I'm sure some of them, as they came in with the Medes and Persians, were like, we're going to have positions of leadership, right? In other words, I think I'm going to get the corner office, you know? And they find out Daniel gets to keep it. Who's he? He's from the old regime. Why is he still in a position of leadership? I have to answer to him? That's going to rankle politically these people, these Medes and Persians in leadership in chapter 6. So that's the basis. Let's begin to look at chapter 6. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 princes, which would be over the whole kingdom. So the Medes and Persian Empire. Over these 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was first. Let's stop right there. There's 120 leaders. There's 3 that those report to, and Daniel is head of the 3. So you understand there's some disconnect here. There's some anger. They wanted that power. They wanted that position. That's going to be the motivating factor of what unfolds in chapter 6. Daniel was the first, that the princes might give account unto them, and the king should have no damage. So they're the ones that are accountable. Verse 3, then this Daniel was preferred above the presidents and princes. Why? Because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king thought to send him over the whole realm. Darius said, tell you what, why don't I just go move to the beach house, you know, and you run things. Well, there was an excellent spirit within him. Again, the world always has a hard time defining what that is, right? The world would say, there's just something about that guy, right? Something very unique about him, something special about him. As a Christian, we know that the spirit that is in him is the Holy Spirit. He's a believer and a faithful believer. He's a man of God. All of these kings eventually find that out, right? Nebuchadnezzar found that out. Belshazzar found that out. Darius will too. We'll see that in Darius. Darius makes some very interesting comments here in regards to Daniel and Daniel's faith. But there's an excellent spirit in him, something about him what was so unique and so valued that the king wanted to just put him in charge and let him run things. So, that doesn't go over well. Verse 4, the presidents, the princes, they sought to find an occasion against Daniel concerning the kingdom. But they could find none occasion nor fault. For as much as he was faithful, neither was there any error or fault found in him. Well, you could tell social media wasn't around, right? You know? Isn't that what they all find fault in today? Well, you made this tweet 5 years ago. Look what you said. I think that's the least of our political problems today. What politician today would we say they could find no fault, no error, nothing they had done wrong? To be honest with you, we seem to be at a point more so lately when we say things like, Well, we're not hiring a choir boy, you know. We're not looking for a preacher. We have to overlook some of the things they've done and take the best. We tend to vote today on the against the worst and not for the best, right? You know, I'm not being political. I'm just saying that tends to be the case today. Like, well, we're not crazy about them, but they're worse, so we'll take the less of two evils. That's voting in America in my lifetime. You know, we're never usually thrilled about who we're voting for. Obviously, I didn't vote for Ronald Reagan. I was too young. I'm not being political. Just kidding. Verse 5. Then said these men, we shall not find any occasion against Daniel except we find it against him concerning the law of his God. They're going to use his faith against him. Verse 6. The presidents, princes assembled together to the king, said thus unto him, King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, I'm just pausing there. All the presidents? I think we'll find out all but one. All the presidents of the kingdom, the governors, the princes, the counselors, the captains, have consulted together to establish a royal statute to make a firm decree that whosoever shall ask a petition of any god or man for 30 days, save of thee, O king, he shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing, that it be not changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. Wherefore King Darius signed the writing and the decree. Why did he sign that? I don't know, right? That sounds like such an unusual thing. And I don't know the mindset of the people of the day or the way that they operated or the political nature of that day. But here, these leaders in the country and the empire have come forward and say, we're going to sign this thing. We just think so much of you, king, that we don't want anybody to ask a petition of anybody else except you for the next 30 days. And the king's like, okay, and he signs it. Why? I don't know. Verse 10, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, and this is the key verse in the whole chapter. Verse 10, I think, is the key verse. When Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went into his house, his windows being open in his chamber toward Jerusalem. He kneeled upon his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he did aforetime, which means as he always did. The same time he always did, in the same manner he always did. Then these men assembled. Where? Well, outside his window, right? Looking up at his house. And they found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. So they made a beeline, verse 12, to the king, right? Then they came near and spake before the king concerning the king's decree. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god or man within 30 days, save of thee, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which altereth not. We're having a Bible study here. Can I tell you something that just jumped off the page to me? Verse 7, the first time the decree is written out. In the middle of verse 7, whosoever shall ask a petition of any god, small g. But I just read verse 12. Hast thou not signed a decree that every man that shall ask a petition of any god, capital G. Is that interesting? They made the petition generic, but as they came to argue the point in verse number 12, they knew that Daniel was talking to his God, and it's acknowledged here, it is the one and only true God. I just thought that's an interesting grammatical point in the Word of God. Verse 13, then answered they and said before the king, Daniel, which is of the children of the captivity of Judah. Don't you love how people throw that in there? Daniel, you know, the one that was taken as a slave, the Jew, that Israelite guy, him. Do you think they said that with respect or disdain? I think they said that with disdain, the way they said it. Remember, he was taken as a slave. Listen, king, we grew up as Medes and Persians, but you put him in charge over us. He was taken as a slave from that Israel place. O king, nor the decree thou hast signed, but maketh his petition 3 times a day. The king, when he heard these words, was sore displeased with Daniel? No. No. Who was he displeased with? Himself. Because he knew politically he had just been had. Right? He knew politically they got him. This is what they were doing. They came in verse number 7 as if they were trying to build up his ego. Oh, we love you, king. We want to honor you in this way, king. And in verse number 13, 14, they couldn't wait to come and tell the king what Daniel had done so they could get him. The king, when he heard those things, was sore displeased with himself. He set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. I think all other business in the empire was put to the side for the day. And the king did nothing more than try to save Daniel's life. He felt, I think, some responsibility here. He had been politically tricked and was going to do his best to save this man who there was an excellent spirit was in. He trusted him completely. 15, these men assembled unto the king, and said unto the king, Know, O king, that the law of the Medes and Persians is that no decree nor statute which the king establisheth may be changed. They're coming in saying, look, that the Constitution says. These are probably people who don't like the Constitution, right? That are real quick to wave the Constitution and say, well, that's what it says. We can't change it now. Too late, king. The king commanded, they brought Daniel, they cast him into the den of lions. Not before this. Now the king spake and said unto Daniel, Thy God, whom thou servest continually, he will deliver thee. That is great faith right there. That is great faith from this king who we don't know of having any godly knowledge or heart for God. We don't have any reason to believe, at least at this point already, that he's a believer. And the king said he worked all day to try to stop this travesty from happening. When he couldn't get it overturned and Daniel was to be cast into the lion's den, the king said, Daniel, I think your God can see you through this. Wow. Why did he think that? What made him think that? Let's be honest right here. Let's talk about this for a second. Do you think he was able to claim Bible verses to show how God could see him through that? No. I don't think he knew any Bible verses. What did he know? History. The 3 Hebrew children. He knew Daniel. He knew the character of Daniel. He knew there was something about him. And earlier in this passage it said, well, he had an excellent spirit. And in this particular time, the king says, it's your God. There's something there. It's your God. He can deliver you. Verse 17, a stone was brought, laid upon the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet, as they have it done, and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose might not be changed concerning Daniel. The king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought in before him, and his sleep went from him. He couldn't sleep that night. Usually instruments of music would play, and he said, no, not tonight, not tonight. Usually food was brought in, and the chef was called in to make a meal or a late night snack. He said, not tonight. He wouldn't eat. He played no music. He didn't sleep. The king, listen, of the Mede and Persian Empire. Were not these the Medes and Persians? What did they do to Belshazzar at the end of chapter 5? Well, we don't have the details, but Belshazzar lost his head, right? He lost his life. He didn't survive the night. When they came in, they immediately wreaked some havoc upon the people. This is the mindset of the people. So it was not unusual. Listen, these are people who have a den of lions. Why do they have a den of lions? Because they throw people in it. Right? I mean, it's not by accident they had a den of lions. They didn't have to go find lions. They had a den of lions. This was not unusual to throw people in it. This was the culture that they were in, and yet this particular night, the king believed that Daniel's God could save him. He spent the night fasting, not sleeping, concerned about Daniel. This is unusual. This is a unique instance in something that should be routine and familiar. Verse 19. I love this. Verse 19, the king rose very early in the morning. He went in haste into the den of lions. Do you think he'd ever done that before? I'm just asking. We don't know. But I don't think it was routine in his practice to get up the next morning and check on the lions in the lion's den to see what became of the people they threw in the night before. And I don't want to be crass here, but I would think most of the time when they threw people in the night before, they knew what happened to them before they set the signet of the seal. It was a horrid thing. When he came to the den, he cried with a lamentable voice unto Daniel. His voice was cracking. He was concerned. The king spake and said, Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest continually, able to deliver thee from the lions? Isn't that an interesting comment? Is God able to do that? Oh boy, God loves to show himself in these situations, right? When the world is looking, when the world is wondering. And he mentioned Daniel, who is faithful in serving your God, who serves your God continually. That's the spirit and the character that the king knew in regards to Daniel. And I don't think he was that shocked when Daniel answered in verse number 21. That Daniel said unto the king, O king, live forever. My God has sent his angel, has shut the lions' mouths, that they have not hurt me. For as much as before him innocency was found in me, he was not guilty. And also before thee, O king, have I done no hurt. The king was exceedingly glad for him, commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den. No manner of hurt was found on him. Why? Because he believed in his God. We have these Sunday school pictures or flannel graph type pictures sometimes where Daniel's almost sitting with the lions, maybe leaning up against them like a big pillow. I don't think that was the case. I kind of, personally, and I'm just trying to put myself in Daniel's shoes, I think he was probably sitting on the other side of the den looking at him with a wary eye. Darius didn't sleep all night. I bet Daniel didn't sleep all night either, I'm not saying he didn't believe or have faith. I'm saying he's looking at these lions. An angel shut their mouth, thank goodness. But I think it was a long night. He wasn't in there for 5 minutes. He was in there for an extended period of time. His faith had to endure for an extended period of time as he's waiting this out. And I don't know that he has a guarantee that just because he survived the night, they're going to let him out. Probably no precedent had been set there, right? I'm going to believe from what we know about the lion's den, no one else had made it out. So what's the precedent? What do you do when someone survives the night? Well, they're going to set a precedent right here. Verse 24, the king commanded. They brought these men which had accused Daniel, they cast them into the dens of lions, them, their children, their wives, their whole family. That's what I mean. This was a brutal regime. This was a brutal time. This was not a pleasant time. This was not something they were unused to. The lions had mastery of them. So the lions were hungry. Why didn't they hurt Daniel the night before? Because God stopped the mouths of the lions. Verse 25, Then King Darius wrote unto all the people, the nations and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom men tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. And his kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall be even unto the end. What a proclamation from the king of the Mede and Persian Empire. What a proclamation was made. I don't know if Darius came to a saving knowledge of God or not, right? Maybe he was moved on this particular instance in this particular night and wrote this proclamation or morning about Daniel, about his God. I don't know. Was there a profound change in him? I don't know. I would like to hope so, right? Maybe someday we'll get to talk to old Darius in heaven someday. I don't know. But look at that proclamation. He is the living God, steadfast forever. His kingdom, that which shall not be destroyed. His dominion shall be even unto the end. That is a powerful statement and very accurate. Very well written. Very well. He goes on, he delivereth and rescueth. He worketh signs and wonders in heaven and in earth. Who hath delivered Daniel from the power of the lions? So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Verse 28, is there some irony there? Of course he prospered. Some of his biggest critics, didn't make it. The people who were most against him were going, hey, you want to come against Daniel? Look what happened to the last guys that did, That didn't work out so well for them. Daniel prospered because God was with him. Daniel prospered because he believed in the Almighty God. There was no error, no skeletons in his closet. They couldn't find anything on him. The one thing I wanted to point out as we close here on Daniel in this particular lesson, and I think it has to do with what we see happening in our culture today. And I alluded to this, if you remember, weeks ago when we started the book of Daniel. I wanted to get to this particular passage. I think we can see something here that's very applicable to things that we have gone through in our country not too recently, not too long ago, and perhaps very much so things we may be going through in the future before the Lord comes back. The proclamation was made. Daniel wasn't allowed to make petition of any other god. So Daniel went home, opened his windows, knelt on his knees, and prayed 3 times a day where people could see him. Do we have to pray with the windows open? Can we only pray on our knees? Is it important that we only pray when people see us? I mean, Jesus talked about the Pharisees that had to be seen, right? I mean, Jesus talked about going into your closet and praying. Why couldn't Daniel have just kept his windows shut? Would God not have heard him? I believe Daniel was not going to let the government tell him how to worship. Daniel wasn't trying to make a scene. Daniel worshiped the way Daniel's always worshiped. And just because the government came along and said, we don't want you to do it that way anymore, Daniel's like, that's too bad. I pray 3 times a day, every day, in the same place, with the windows open towards Jerusalem, as I'm praying for the redemption of my people, of my city, of my country. I do it the same way every day. And you can write whatever man-made laws you want, but I'm going to worship the same way I always worshiped. You can't not tell me how to worship. I think that's an important element in all of this. And we've, I think, I'm going to be honest here, I think during COVID time in Pennsylvania, we weren't up against this. Some other states were, right? Some of the other states really dealt with this. We could say what we wanted to about our former governor. He left his hands off churches and left churches alone. He did. But some of these other states did not. And they had some big battles in California and Maryland, some other places that made some news. These were places that, no, we're going to worship the way we always worship. We're going to do it the way we've always done it. And I think there's a biblical precedent for that in Daniel 6. I don't think I'm reading into it to see that. Daniel decided he's going to worship the way he's always worshiped. The government cannot tell him how to worship. God. Daniel gives us, I think, a better indication than ever of how to deal with a culture that is opposed to God, right? Whether it's the 3 Hebrew children, whether it's eating the king's food, whether it's bowing down to the statue, whether it's the lion's den and not being able to pray in chapter 6, we see a continual picture here of those that are believers up against a culture and a strong empire that is against God. We have, by the grace of God, come some 250 years in a country that was God-fearing and God-believing. Though we're finding our country trending away from that very quickly. Very quickly, we're moving away from that. And so I think more than ever, we can find some advice and confidence and examples from the book of Daniel in what we may have to do at times in order to worship and be steadfast and be consistent and make a stand. And it may cost us, right? It may cost us. There may be a tribulation for that, but there's going to be times that may well be ahead of us.